I'm going to be saying the phrase dark elves a lot in this video, and I promise that every time I do it's totally and completely serious. Hello! Welcome once again to Storytime, the sad internet show where we spend inordinate amounts of time talking about movies I don't like. I won't judge your lifestyle choices if you don't judge mine. Today, as billed, we are going over Thor, The Dark World. This is Thor's second standalone film and third appearance in MCU so far, and he's just as brooding and fabulous as always. And you know what that means? It means no romance or strong feelings. Disney doesn't condone such unchaste smut. Get your minds out of the gutter. Together with Incredible Hulk and Iron Man, this film seems to be considered by fans as one of the red-headed stepchildren of the series.
You got the dud!
The reason for this, as near as I can tell, is that they just woke up one day and decided this was what they were going to feel about it. Because, as with Hulk and Iron Man, this movie really isn't any better or worse than most of the other movies in the series. This isn't to say, of course, that this movie isn't full of bad and silly things. It's just that they all are. As usual, we're not going to leave any stone in this field of mediocrity unturned. If you're concerned about spoilers, or for some reason this is your favorite movie, this video's probably not for you.
Go, my son. Leave me.
Thor, The Dark Elves is a 2013 film directed by Alan Taylor. Prior to getting sucked into and then spat out of the MCU, he was a prolific TV director on shows including Sex and the City, The Sopranos, Mad Men, and Game of Thrones, among many others. The movie was written by these guys, some of whom you'll remember helped bring us Captain America: The Worst Avenger, and will later be responsible for other terrible atrocities. But we're not here to talk about that yet. We're here to look at what we have. And what we have is another story that really wants to be about an impossible star-crossed love, but is ultimately, yet again, about nothing. To sum up, Thor has been pretty busy keeping order across the 9 realms ever since the Rainbow Road was destroyed. Oh, also the Rainbow Road has been rebuilt, evidently pretty easily. So that's good. But he misses Jane, who, for some reason, he cannot just go visit. I guess because the realm of Earth is only experiencing its normal level of war and strife. On Earth, Jane is still doing science stuff of some kind, this time in London. While doing that, she accidentally stumbles into another dimension.
The third dimension.
Sorry.
And gets possessed with the ether, red demon goo, which apparently destroys stuff. Except her. Thor finds out and brings her to Asgard to heal her, where they are attacked by dark elves who want the goo. Then they fight about it for the rest of the movie, and there are Loki hijinks. What more could you want? Let's check in with our characters and see if they'll do anything interesting this time. As I said, Thor has been being a friendly neighborhood colonial oppressor, going around to the 9 realms, except Earth, to make sure they don't exert a right of self-governance. On his time off, he pines for Jane, who he hasn't seen since the first movie and who, for some reason, he cannot go visit now. He is still cautious of being king, for reasons which are not made clear. Then he does punches. Since the first movie, 2 years ago, Jane has been looking for Thor, though she has also apparently kinda given up as she is now half-heartedly seeing other guys. She is in London for reasons having to do with Eric Science Man. In fact, it seems like she has been there for a while, but had no contact with him. Also, her mother apparently lives there, though nothing is ever made of this. And Darcy is still her unpaid intern, like 2 years later. I guess she gave up on her political science degree to help Jane track down an alien man she spent a weekend with one time. Marvel loves women! We see Loki put in space jail for what he did on Earth, which is considered a crime by the violent colonialists we see killing and imprisoning other people in the next scene. He sits there for a while until the plot needs him to be broken out to fight bad guys. He is shown to be very distraught over the death of his mother. He also appears to make up with Thor, though this is also doubtful since in the end, after pretending to be killed or legitimately almost getting killed, he is impersonating Odin on the throne. Malekith is the leader of the Dark Elves, a term the movie uses many times and always takes seriously. Maybe this is just a personal thing, but the main association I have with that term comes from a children's Christmas book in which a Christmas-hating evil queen attacks the North Pole with dark elves, whose biggest weakness is black licorice. It's a quality book, actually, with great art and a nice Christmassy story. Anyway, Malekith and his minions have been hibernating on their Borg ship until the red goo wakes them up so they can unleash darkness upon the universe again. This is all we get. He's just a murderous psychopath. Eric is back for the third time, now as an insane person developing gravity science because he somehow knows of the convergence. He's crazy because Loki was in his head. Gee, I hope Arrow Guy's okay. I'm sure he will be. His main purpose is to provide the team with magic gravity sticks in order to beat the bad guy. Odin is opposed to Thor being with Jane for reasons. The main one appears to be because she is mortal, even though he explains that Asgardians are also mortal and therefore no better than anyone else in the universe. But since he is also a violent colonialist, his disdain for her plays like a kind of racism. Odin is definitely not okay with miscegenation. After his wife is killed, he becomes blinded by grief and hate, and wants an all-out war with Malekith, but this reads no differently than how he is normally. The stereotype fighters show up again whenever the movie needs a speaking character on Asgard that's not Thor or Odin.
Arr, me mateys. Arr.
And apparently the Asian one isn't even from there, which only reinforces Asgard's position as self-professed benevolent colonizers. And don't forget Mother's in this one. She gets killed so the plot can happen and so we can build sympathy for a psychopathic murderer. Marvel loves women. One would think that with no new characters other than a pretty milquetoast villain, the movie would really invest in the characters we do have.
You'd like to think that, wouldn't you?
One would be wrong. This is most glaringly true with Thor and Jane, who 2 entire movies have not figured out what to do with. We cannot adequately answer the question, why do Jane and Thor want to be together? I mean, other than... Hallelujah, raining man. Their relationship doesn't really mean anything for the story, either of Thor specifically or MCU more broadly. Thor is obligated to protect Earth, whether or not he cares about Jane or anyone else there. Knowing her does give him a personal stake in its protection, but since she gets dropped from the series after this movie anyway, clearly it's not that big of a stake. He's got his new super buddies. Rose before hose, am I right? Disney thinks so. If the story cared about Jane at all, she could have much more broader involvement, using her scientific expertise and access to Asgardian knowledge to develop intergalactic or interdimensional travel things or work with S.H.I.E.L.D. or something, which might be useful in other stories down the road. If you had any kind of plan for them. As it is, her scientific expertise matters not at all to this movie specifically or to the series as a whole. She may as well just be any random person. Marvel loves women. More seriously, we don't really see any development of Thor and Jane's relationship. They never encounter any real conflict. At no point do Jane or Thor express any concern about the relationship, like the fact that it is extremely long distance, or the fact that Jane has approximately 2% of the lifespan of Thor, or the fact that they are probably technically different species and therefore might have messed up kids, or the fact that Odin clearly doesn't like her, or the fact that Thor's job is to suppress the freedoms of billions of people around the galaxy. Nothing. Their concern is the red goo inside Jane, which is important, obviously, but which doesn't lead to any development. It's just a plot device. Therefore, narratively, Thor and Jane are a waste of time. Thor and Loki fare better, which is uncomfy, even though they just kind of rehash the things that have been brought up from the other 2 times they were together. Loki feels unseen as the second son, and Thor just wants him back. But This is the presence of an actual conflict, and the resolution, or at least exploration of that conflict, does help further the plot. So that's good. Pretty much a first in the series. It only took us, 10 movies to get here.
You did it! Congratulations!
The problem is we get more development for a psychopathic murderer than we do for protagonists, because he's like the internet's boyfriend and no one cares about them. Which is fine, I guess. I'm just not sure if this movie has room for both Thor and Loki and Thor and Jane. The movie would likely be much more engaging and sound if one of these were to be removed. If the movie is Thor and Jane, we get an exploration of love overcoming apparent differences with thematic possibilities touching on colonialism and stuff. If it's Thor and Loki, we get a story about brothers and trust and what it means to be family and overcoming psychopathy, I guess. With both at the same time, we get a story about stopping a guy from doing a thing by punching him. In other words, nothing.
You get nothing. You lose.
One of the most common criticisms of MCU is the villain problem. People feel that the villains for these movies are usually pretty boring and uncompelling, which, yeah, they are. Most of them are interchangeable. Bad guy wants thing, usually related to control or power, so good guys have to stop him, usually by punches. Of course, there's nothing new to this formula. It's how basically all villains are set up. But not all villains are boring. Why? The answer, of course, is characterization. Good villains are characterized in a really interesting way, even if their plan for world domination is uninspired. The best villains grow out of some central conflict related to character. We like the Joker so much not only because he's an interesting figure or looks cool or has cool moments of villainy. We like him because he accesses a central dilemma of character within Bruce Wayne, in a way that someone like Scarecrow or Penguin might not. So, knowing that, we can see why people don't tend to care for villains in MCU. They are almost universally arbitrary. You could swap them around and have no real impact on the story being told apart from particularities around whatever MacGuffin they're fighting about. Thor could fight the red guy over the blue cube, or the dark elves over the red goo, and the only thing that would change would be the logistics of their encounters. Thematically, nothing would be different, because thematically nothing is there to begin with, because the villains do not grow from some central inevitable conflict. They're just there by random assignment to cause a ruckus. I mean, they could relate to character, it just is slightly harder to make a story do that.
What are you doing inside? Work was hard, so we quit.
What?
Hard work made us quit.
And it's slightly easier to write a story where there is a scary-looking guy trying to do a thing that the hero doesn't want him to do, either because that thing will disrupt the status quo where the hero is on top, or because something the hero cares about is caught up in the mix. Or possibly, and usually coincidentally, both. Thor, the Dark Elves is an example of this. In this movie, the primary conflict stems from Malekith wanting to redarken the universe with the power of the red goo. This is a thing he has always wanted, and which he was always going to reattempt at the next planetary alignment, and which we can assume Thor would have tried to stop if he were in a story that worked. I'm going to say here that it's stupid that the Asgardians don't know the Dark Elves still exist. The story works better if they know it and are worried they will reemerge at the convergence, hence the need for elevated galactic security or whatever. Jane's involvement is entirely coincidental. None of this has any sort of thematic resonance because it doesn't access any inner conflict within Thor or Jane. He doesn't have to make a choice between, saving the world and saving Jane or something, nor is the present crisis a consequence of a past mistake of Thor's or anyone else that we know. I mean, at best it ties into Asgard's colonialist past, but since the movie doesn't recognize this as a problem, it can't grow into a conflict. It's not even a result of Jane trying to make her own way back to Thor and using mystical powers she can't really control. The conflict in the story is entirely coincidental to them. So, because Malekith's goal doesn't conflict with anything our protagonists want, apart from just general being alive, we as an audience don't really have that much investment in seeing him defeated. And because he is not portrayed in any kind of sympathetic way, we don't experience any conflict on his behalf. Therefore, he's boring.
That's boring. You're boring everybody. Quit boring everyone.
There's an easy fix to this, found in things the story has already established. If we lean into some of the problematic colonialist aspects of Asgard, all of a sudden we have the potential for conflict and thematic material. Here's my pitch. Malekith doesn't want to destroy the universe. He wants to create a place within it where he and his people can live in peace after being vagabonds for thousands of years. That place was taken from them by the actions of Odin's father and perpetuated by Odin and Thor's colonialist regime. Jane, who has access to Malekith's mind through the red goo she is still possessed with, believes that he doesn't want further conflict. Thor and Odin, who have been told stories about how bad Malekith's people are, don't believe it, perpetuating the fighting and inflaming Malekith's anger and desperation. The story can resolve either by Thor breaking from his father and engaging in diplomacy, or with the total destruction of Malekith's people in the name of peace upheld and enforced by Asgard. Jane can alternately be proud of Thor's decision, or scorn him, or forgive him, depending on whatever. Most importantly, everyone gets to make a decision that demonstrates development and has consequences, and which helps give life to a meaningful theme for the audience. As I said with Ironist Man, if this were a TV show, it wouldn't be such an issue to have some unremarkable villain of the week set up. But since this is a major motion picture event, I think we can try a little harder.
Hard work made us quit.
Marvel and Disney have a reputation for playing it safe, unless they do stupid things, with their characters almost always opting for what they feel will play best to the widest audience. What this means is they think very little of you as an audience member. They set up characters to be as broadly appealing and unpolarizing as possible, and put them in situations with non-challenging decisions to make, meaning they experience negligible development. This process is repeated with the addition of a few quips and the possible scent of romance, but nothing more, and they call it good. These are not the actions of people who know they have an awesome story to tell and are excited to tell it. These are the actions of people who are fleecing you for your money. That's all.
You get nothing!
Except for...
One of the things we've learned from examining the films in MCU is how often Disney will use them to, intentionally or not, propagate really problematic ideas to its audience of impressionable children and uncritical adults. We see this in the Iron Man movies with their glorification of billionaires and demonization of oversight in any form, and in Captain America with its exalting of the persecuted white boy mythology. As I've already mentioned several times in this video, we see it here in this movie's depiction of benevolent colonialism. Of course, we saw this in the first Thor movie too, particularly with regards to the frost giants, who are violently debilitated and subjugated by Odin. In that movie, it's played more as Odin protecting his own territory against encroachers, and excused by the giants being portrayed as evil no-goodniks. The same is true in this movie with respect to the Dark Elves. They are shown to want to basically destroy the whole universe, thereby justifying the complete destruction of their people by Asgard. Known as genocide, unless they are bad guys apparently. That's all one thing, made a little grody by the choice to depict Asgard as the center of culture and learning in the universe, and anyone who wants anything different from Asgard as being godless barbarian villains. But this movie indulges in colonialist apologia elsewhere, with Thor restoring order to the Nine Realms. We are told they have apparently fallen into chaos with the absence of the Rainbow Road. Why this triggers chaos is not explained, but my assumption is that if Asgardians can no longer travel wherever they want, a privilege not really held by anybody else, they're not around to punish behavior they don't like.
Bad dog.
We don't get into the geopolitics of the Nine Realms, but we do see an extensive prison block which houses not Asgardians, but people from around the universe. This means Asgard has jurisdiction in those places, and authority to deport and imprison people at their discretion. If this is the case, we can assume Asgard gets something from these various realms in exchange. Either this is a commercial venture, Asgard will provide protection in exchange for food or minerals or whatever, or it is a colonial one. Asgard, who has stronger forces will occupy, protect a given place. Those who go along with this can mostly live their lives, while those who resist are killed or imprisoned light years away. The way Odin talks does not lead me to believe he fronts a contracted space police force. His title, after all, is Allfather, and since he didn't create the realms, we have to assume it was some sort of conquest that made them his responsibility. Guys, Asgard is basically England, and the 9 realms are basically India, Africa, Australia, North America, and the Caribbean. Or, if we want to get uncomfy, Asgard is the US, and the 9 realms are the various territories we have who will accept as soldiers but deny representation in Congress. Which, fine. Asgard could be a great metaphorical stand-in for historical colonialism in our world and emerging neocolonialism, and the ongoing issues all that causes. The icky thing is that Disney, at all times, portrays Asgard as faultless. They are right to do what they do because otherwise chaos is perpetuated by horned pagans. But Loki is right when he says that what he attempted on Earth is not really any different than what Odin has done elsewhere, but the movie wants us to believe that he's just being impertinent.
I'm a bad widow boy.
When Odin did it, it was good conquest, to bring light to people in darkness and unity to the universe, not just for petty domination. The fact that he feels he must control all of them just shows how much he cares. He's the Allfather. Odin punishing Loki is like whoever was ruling Spain punishing Columbus. But the film doesn't acknowledge this irony because Thor and what he represents must be unimpeachably good, and because Disney itself is a voracious neo-colonial entity bent on marketplace domination and cultural homogenization. So you can see how they'd want us to not think about that, or think that it's good actually. Here's some other stuff I thought of if you're still around. 1. The magic gravity sticks need a little work, in that they don't make any sense at all. Like, how do they work? How are they powered? How can they be altered from detection devices to causational devices? How are they controlled, other than randomly? We are haphazardly made to understand that they are supposed to detect gravitational anomalies, which, fine. But making them cause gravitational anomalies feels like a stretch. It's like MacGyvering a seismograph to cause earthquakes. It doesn't make any sense. They're just the most silly way to achieve this particular thing they wanted in the story where we can like fly around and stuff. The climax takes place at a university. Just make the university have some experimental gravity lab with a bunch of equipment. Like they're trying to invent gravitational propulsion or something to make the hover carriers feel more plausible. Our guys can be in there messing around with stuff and create some gravitational hijinks just like before. This is petty, but I bring it up because it kind of broke my brain the first time I saw this movie. It was just 1 or 7 levels of silliness too many given how little it was supported and how critical a role it plays in resolving the conflict. The magic sticks are, for all intents and purposes, magic. And if magic is your resolution device, you're not trying hard enough.
Work was hard, so we quit.
It feels like a little kid making up new rules in a game, not the carefully planned script to a $170 million movie made by professionals. 2. At some point between the end of the movie and the middle of the credits, the Asgardians figured out a way to capture and contain the ether in a safe, easily portable thing. Given how important the Xfinity Stones will become, feels like we should see this. How does one handle the red goose safely? Has its form been altered? Did many Bothans die to bring us this information? We don't know. 3. The most secure place the Asgardians could think of to keep an Xfinity Stone with, as they put it, infinite destructive power, was with some weird sketchy guy from a Flock of Seagulls cover band. Like, there was nowhere else? Also, why is it unwise to keep 2 stones together? We don't know anything about these yet. It seems like maybe an important thing would be for them to discover why it's bad to put them together. I don't know. 4. I like how Thor is all like, Loki died with honor, he is my best and only brother. We better just leave his carcass out here in the open in this dust storm after you, milady. 5. I brought up the language thing already, that everyone in the universe apparently speaks modern English, At first, I was willing to justify this as a let's just move past it for storytelling logistics' sake type of thing. But this movie breaks that by giving the elves their own language. So, again, why do they speak English on Asgard? And we know they do because Jane does, and the Dark Elves do, and they've been asleep for the last 5,000 years. Also, apparently everything in the universe has human form and breathes the same kind of air as on Earth. So that's lucky. 6. This is our third instance of an apocalyptic space laser. It's red goo, but it's a space laser. 7. The Asgardians send the red goo to the Collector, but we know that technically Loki is in charge, impersonating Odin. I'm not convinced this is a choice he would make, to send something so powerful away like that to a weirdo. If he's in charge of Asgard, I don't think he'd want to watch it burn now, and the impulse will probably take him to wreck other people sooner or later.
I'm a bad widow boy.
It just feels like the plot reaching in and moving things around for the sake of teasing the next episode. 8. At the Collectors, we learned that the blue cube from the other movies and the red goo from this movie are both Xfinity stones, which unless you're a fanboy means nothing, other than that we are told before that the red stuff is definitely not a stone. So... And I think that's it. At the end of the day, Thor, the Dark Elves is nothing more or less than another episode of MCU. It does some long-term plot work by introducing another Xfinity stone in the red goo, even though functionally it seems pretty similar to the blue cube. Like, they both destroy stuff, even I guess the blue cube can make portals and the red goo can't yet. Whatever. But it does nothing to develop Thor or Jane as characters. She is still Twitter-pated and spacey, and he is still reluctant to be king and nobly. I mean, I guess he can visit now, so that's nice. Loki, the psychopathic murderer, does get development, but it's unclear how much of it was just made up, meaning that whatever did happen was meaningless. I hesitate to call something that employed thousands of people and made decent money a waste of space, but narratively there is really nothing going on here. Fans are right to be unenthusiastic about this movie, though, as we've seen, it is no better or worse really than most of the other films in MCU. It has some good jokes, some action-y action, some unintentionally problematic stuff, and boring, underdeveloped characters running around punching people. Like all of them. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to join me next time when we'll be examining Captain America: The Winter Soldier, a movie that casts a violent, paranoid conspiracy theorist as its flawless hero, and just uses another character as its subtitle. It makes as much sense as Captain America, Black Widow, or Captain America, Iron Man. Who's in charge of vetting this stuff? Good night.
Here is an ordinary square. Whoa, whoa, slow down, egghead.
Great job, everybody. It's great to meet you.